The proceeding.
Order, order. I call Ronnie Cowan to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered gambling advertising in sport. Well, a couple of weeks ago we debated in here affordability checks in gambling, and the government benches were rammed with people who seemed to have racecourses in their constituency. They didn't understand that affordability checks didn't apply on course. I'm not sure where they are today. Did somebody say Cheltenham? I don't claim to be an expert on how advertising and marketing work. Like most people, I'm exposed to adverts on TV, on billboards, on the internet, and I wonder, does associating a puppy dog with a certain brand of toilet paper make me more likely to buy that brand? Do pictures of a car racing through stunning mountain scenery or the unusually empty city centre streets increase the chances of me buying that particular car? Do adverts offering me free bets or extra spins make it more likely that I will gamble? And I presume most people believe we are impervious to such obvious and sometimes clumsy attempts at selling. And then I take a step back, and particularly obvious during an election year, and I can see that I'm also guilty of this. I'm trying to get re-elected, and I promote myself, and I brand, and the brand that I represent, through advertising. I consider how best to get that combination over to my constituents, and like most politicians, I use the tried and tested methods of leaflets, door knocking, newsletters, hustings, radio, TV and social media. And I tell people, vote Cowan, vote SNP. Vote often. My experience tells me that this has worked 3 times before, and therefore I'm doing something right. The gambling industry are simply doing the same thing, but their income is vast, so they spend huge sums of money, £1.5 billion a year, to achieve a far greater reach than any parliamentarian can, and we're all exposed to it. If I see a letterbox that says no leaflets, then I don't post one. Unfortunately, the gambling industry is less selective, and by placing adverts in and around sporting arenas, putting them on the players and around the pitch, they remove the opportunity for fans to decline the offer of being advertised to. Despite the Advertising Standards Authority and Committee of Advertising Practice, the gambling industry continue to stretch the rules. 3,500 gambling logos visible during a single English Premier League game in plain sight for anyone to see. Only 7% of those were front of shirt. Therefore, the impending change to front of shirt adverts means nothing, and the gambling industry know it. It was proposed that gambling advert-free family areas and football grounds could be established, but 1 year on, nothing has changed. And when it comes to advertising to children, Bet365, Ladbrokes, MRQ and Lights Camera Bingo all broke the rules. In short, if the gambling industry, any industry, didn't think spending huge amounts of money was not generating more in returns for them, they simply wouldn't do it. And self-regulation is not sufficient for any industry ever hungry for more. Advertising increases the gambling industry revenue. Advertising normalises gambling. According to the ASA, this was a predicted consequence of the 2005 Gambling Act. Advertising increases the reach and therefore the number of people who are gambling. And the hypocrisy is that while gambling benefits from the sports, most sports don't actually benefit from gambling. The gambling industry is a parasite that's living off the lifeblood of the sports it uses. It makes the gambling the most important factor and the sport a poor second. The game's not the same without a bet. That's the message, which is a great shame. I remember great moments in sport with joy. Daley Thompson's decathlon goals in 1980 and 84, Ian Botham's 149 against Australia at Headingley, Ovet, Cowan and Cram race against the clock and each other. Torvill Dean, Sarajevo in 1984, and Andy Murray winning Wimbledon twice. Not an advert in sight. George Best, just being George Best. I didn't need a bet in those things to enjoy them. The sport must be the priority, and gambling advertising must be curtailed. And I would say, just like tobacco, has completely removed from the world of sport. But of course it goes beyond that. The UK government has said that there was good evidence that advertising had a disproportionate impact on people who already had problems with their gambling. In addition, some forms of online advertising had a strong appeal to those under 18. According to Ipsos Mori report, more than 4 out of 5 aged 11 to 24 reported seeing gambling advertising on TV, and that includes the National Lottery. 2/3 reported seeing gambling promotions on their social media channels. In September 2023, a Bristol University report told us that 92% of content marketing ads sent by major gambling brands were not clearly identifiable as advertising. That breaches a key advertising regulation. Less than a quarter featured age warnings. There was at least one gambling advert during any commercial break on TalkSport radio, and 600 gambling messages during 2 hours of Sky Sports News. And 1,902 gambling ads on social media generated a total of 34 million impressions. One of the lead researchers, Raffaello Rossi, said the report showed that gambling marketing during the Premier League weekends is inescapable, and that fans were bombarded with gambling marketing through various channels, making it a normal part of football consumption. He claimed self-regulation of the gambling industry was completely failing. Meanwhile, the Gambling Commission is to review incentives. The Gambling Commission will continue to monitor practices, and the Gambling Commission will work to strengthen consent for direct marketing. But in the here and now, 80,000 UK children are addicted or at risk. Up to 1.4 million adults in the UK are harmed directly, and 20% of the population is harmed directly or indirectly. There are between 117 and 496 gambling suicides in England every year. The time to review and monitor has passed. We need to understand the nature of addiction and see it as a health issue. We need to slow down gambling, build in cooling-off periods, give people space and time to consider their actions and the outcomes. Advertising does the opposite of those. It pushes, it cajoles, it encourages. And finally, Mr. Chope, we need to respect the fact that some people may be triggered by adverts. We need to protect our children. And no one is asking anyone to make some sacrifice for this. We aren't asking the government to dip into its pocket. We can ban gambling advertising, and we should be doing it now.
The question is that this House has considered gambling advertising in sport. Syrian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Christopher, it's a privilege to serve under your stewardship, as ever. But can I also apologise in advance to the debate here and to the Minister and to the opposition spokesman who will respond. I've been losing my voice pretty much most of the last week. Lots of my colleagues think that's a good thing. But I give warning, if I stop suddenly, it's because I've given up on this, but not on getting rid of advertising in sport, which is important. And I also may not be here for the wind-ups because I have to go to a doctor's appointment, self-evidently. So I'm a vice-chair alongside my honourable friend in this matter, who has just spoken. And whilst we strongly support the measures that the Minister, and I credit the Minister with having moved this along more than many others have done before him, and I credit him for that. But what I do find is that the whole idea of voluntary agreements with gambling industry have been proved time and time again to be a waste of time. Because all that happens is they are driven by the requirement to constantly renew the users of their gambling area, and most important is, we know, gambling industry targets those who lose and lose big. That's where their money is made from, that's where their profits are drawn from, And what they must always do is constantly have their idea in front of those people to suggest to them subliminally, very clearly, that if they just gamble a bit more, they will win something else. And that is the nature of our gambling. And people say to me, oh, yeah, but, you know, these are just adverts on shirts, and nobody remembers seeing them. But the figures that have just been given to the committee here today are remarkable. I just want to repeat a couple of these and also a couple more. Ipsos Mori, the University of Stirling, found 96% of people aged 11 to 24 could remember and had seen gambling marketing messages and were more likely as a result, their words, not mine, to bet as a result of their seeing that advertising on whether shirts or hoardings or wherever it happened to be. Over three-quarters of young people, 78%, and 86% of adults think that betting now has become an absolutely normal part of watching sport. And I just want to say that again, watching sport. Back in the 18th century, people bet everything on all sorts of sporting events, and it had to be brought under control because of the abuses that were taking place. Today we are seeing things that are redolent of a very unlicensed, but at the same time desperately dangerous activity, which is pushing people to spend their money and become addicted to a process that ultimately damages them and their families. Gambling marketing on football cannot be avoided by fans at any age. I say this as a Tottenham Hotspur season ticket holder who do not use gambling, but you watch other teams and it's all over their shirts and everything else. And I know the idea now is that they will be able to move it away from front of shirt to the side or whatever. Most of the evidence shows categorically it makes no difference, because those will be on shirts that people buy, and it's so on it goes forth. And you will see this becomes part of the club, really, in a way. The nature of which company they have as their sponsor becomes part of their nature of who they are as a club. And so this becomes really, really important. And one study found in football matches that there was a reference to gambling on average every 21 seconds. Half of the Premier League's 20 clubs and 17 out of the 24 championship clubs had gambling companies on their shirts. And, of course, the Football League is sponsored by Sky, who have their own betting company. And, by the way, they all use celebrities to front up a lot of these adverts and to present this as something normal and exciting. And we know who they target. They target that age group of, for the most part, young men, but now more and more young women, who are portrayed as beating the odds. You know, the reality is far from that. I'm not against people betting. They want to bet and gamble, do that anyway. The question is whether we want to see this promoted in such a way as it becomes quite normal. And I think all of this is the critical issue that we're on about today. Another issue of concern of the Gambling Related Harm APPG recent session is the failure of current ASA codes to deliver on the reduction of harm. In the opening weekend of the EPL, it was observed that 92% of content marketing ads sent by major gambling brands were not clearly identifiable as advertising, the point that has already been made, and thus breaches the codes, which is obvious for us to see. We know, and the Minister knows, my right honourable friend knows, this is happening all the time. So we need to tread very carefully when we think that we can rely on agreements with the gambling industry. It's not their nature, for the most part, to abide by those. It is their nature to seek to multiply the amount of people that will gamble, and so they will push the envelope on any agreement that is made. And I also think that current codes are ill-equipped to deal with the online-specific forms of marketing as well. And the ASA should consider the creation of new codes as opposed to revisions to those that are pre-existing. And that would ensure, perhaps, that social media and online marketing can be effectively regulated. I am not one of those that wants to regulate everything, stop everything, and take the pleasure out of what people want to choose. My view, however, is, as with common law, when it is clear that harm is being done, we have an obligation to see if we can restrict that harm so that people's lives aren't damaged. That's it. Not before, not anticipating the event, actually dealing with the harm that exists at present. And the push of gambling advertising is huge, and nobody who watches television or watches a sporting event can escape the idea that this is there in front of them, even subliminally. They may not remember what they're doing. So unless advertising reform is enacted at the source of the point of harm, the reforms will be confined to playing catch-up to the constantly evolving landscape of sponsorship marketing and advertising, and consequently failing to reduce gambling harms. This is why I support this motion. This is why this is cross-party. This is why I think we have an obligation to deal with some of the tougher issues that come our way, notwithstanding the amount of tax that these companies pay to the Treasury. The harm to human beings is the real currency of our lives, and we need to bring that to an end.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Sir Chope. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Inverclyde for securing this very important debate on an issue I and many of my constituents care deeply about. Almost 7,000 gambling messages were shown in 6 televised matches over the Premier League's opening weekend. And if that doesn't set off alarm bells, I'm not sure what will. But my speech isn't about completely opposing gambling. In fact, I'm sure I'll be placing a bet on the Grand National in a few weeks' time, and my other half does a few quid on the acca for football on a Saturday. But it's clear gambling addiction, fuelled by excessive gambling advertisements, is an issue impacting our communities. Nationally, YouGov research found that 1.4 million UK adults are harmed directly by gambling. And shockingly, the Gambling Commission stated that 80,000 UK children are addicted or at risk. I want to say thank you to the brilliant organisations Gambling with Lives and the Big Step campaign, who raise awareness of the harm that's being caused. They've introduced me to their volunteers who have personal connections to the harm caused by gambling. Some had loved ones who sadly ended their lives as a consequence of their gambling addiction, and others are survivors who now campaign to ensure people don't suffer the pain they did. The message is always the same: the pain is preventable. And I found many of these discussions incredibly moving, and the current gambling regulations are terribly failing the public. And there's no sign of change to protect the next generation. We've heard from others the industry's voluntary whistle-to-whistle ban in football is completely ineffective, as it only applies to TV adverts. Over 2/3 of fans who responded to a Salvation poll said they feel it has not prevented children from seeing gambling advertisements in football. So with insufficient regulation, football is often the hook to get the young into gambling, especially as they are then cross-sold highly addictive online casino products. And it's important to recognise that it's not just the fans that are impacted. We've seen the impact on players in recovery who are made to advertise the addictive products, players such as Ivan Toney, Sandro Tonali and Harry Toffolo. Football is so important to our communities. It creates a shared identity that ties us together with a common objective. Mostly just 3 points at the weekend, possibly 6 for Luton this coming weekend, but also seeing our team represent us with dignity. And that's why I'm proud of my local football club, Luton Town, for leading the way by refusing to choose a gambling shirt and stadium sponsor. Across the Premier League and the EFL, only Luton Town's 19 home games will not feature gambling adverts, according to the Big Step. That's only 0.8% of games. However, it's disappointing that 7 Premier League clubs will still display gambling companies as their main shirt sponsor. And Luton Town are part of the Big Step campaign to kick all gambling advertisements out of football, alongside other clubs like Tranmere Rovers and Forest Green Rovers. Sadly, not all football clubs can be relied upon to do the right thing, even though we know that a sponsorship ban would only cost clubs around 2.5% of revenue. So I'd like to ask the Minister what measures the government is considering in curtailing gambling advertising in sport, especially in football. And I reiterate the points already made that this is a public health issue. So just like measures to reduce advertising of cigarettes to tackle smoking harms, Would the Minister, as a first step, consider a review into banning pitchside advertising in football to reduce gambling harm? And I look forward to hearing the Minister's response. Thank you.
Speaking this debate, and can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for Inverclyde for leading the debate and for speaking so diligently on these issues as he has in the Chamber and in Westminster Hall, and he deserves to have the credit and congratulations for that. I know he's been vocal on this issue, and I thank him for that, as this is really such an important issue for the betterment of so many across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I've also been a supporter of further tightening of gambling laws, especially within sport, given the potential dangers it can have on young people and vulnerable adults as well. So it's great to be here to support this matter and to give the Honourable Gentleman the credit and support him in this debate, and has asked for the Minister, which he has done. Also pleased to see the two shadow ministers in their place, and we look forward to their contribution and others as well. I just want to always, as I always do, Mr. Chairman, Sir Christopher, I give a perspective of back home, and it's good to do so, because unfortunately for us back home, gambling has a bigger percentage impact upon people than it does here in the mainland, and that is terribly worrying. In December 2023, the Probation Board for Northern Ireland stated that their most recent survey, it was discovered that Northern Ireland identified some 2.3% of the population as having a gambling problem. That's over 4 times higher than that recorded in the GB mainland right here. So I think that worries me incredibly, and it does, I have to say, reflect my contact with some of my constituents in relation to this issue as well. So that's why it's really important what the Honourable Gentleman is bringing forward, and he deserves credit for that. Furthermore, the impact that gambling has on young people is also incredible, whether they see this through the social media, ads on TV, or even live at football games. The encouragement is there for them to feel the need to partake and participate as they see it. I really commend the Honourable Lady's football club, Luton Town. I know of it because I've been reading about it in the paper, and they were on the TV this morning, by the way. The manager of the team was on this morning as well. So this is really good to see that they're leading the way. I just wish that other teams, including perhaps my own, would be as diligent on this matter. This has revealed that 3 in 10, 30% of under 18s took part in some form of gambling in the last 12 months. Also a worrying trend, Sir Christopher, with young boys being more likely to partake of this. 15% of children said that they were encouraged to do so due to the adverts that they've seen on TV whilst watching football matches. So don't ever think that the impact that watching matches and the advertisements you see doesn't have an impact. Those figures state it clearly, and that influences and underlines again the issue we have before us today. There was some movement in 2022 whereby footballers, celebrities and social media influencers were to be banned from partaking in gambling adverts. There's absolutely no doubt in my head, Mr. Chairman, that this encouraged young people to find a way to gamble by watching those people. Seeing their sporting heroes such as ex-footballers and ex-football managers, etc., promote this does not, in my humble opinion, do much for the cause of protecting young people against the dangers of gambling. So it's great that this not only applies to sporting events, but also online gaming advertisements as well. I've met and spoken with so many families in the past who have sadly lost their children due to the impacts that online gambling has had. Many rightfully have made the point that young people are taught the dangers of excessive drinking, drug use, smoking, road safety and sextortion online, but are not taught, Sir Christopher, near as much about the dangers of gambling and betting, and they should be, because the dangers are just as real. These issues can start so small too, from something as simple as playing a card game with friends, but the addictive nature of gambling is to make the risk of winning addictive, which is harming so many young lives and adult lives out there as well. Gambling, along with alcohol consumption and smoking, etc., is one of those things of life that most will be inclined to try, just by the very nature of the society that I live in and brought up in. It was the norm for the weekends and a Saturday afternoon. However, we have a responsibility, I believe, to raise the awareness of its dangers with the misuse, especially for young people out there who are not aware of the long-term damage this can cause. So I'm pleased some of the correct steps have been taken to combat this. I look very much forward to the Minister's response. The Minister always encapsulates very well our desires for change and our desires to highlight these issues, so I look forward to his comments. Some of the steps taken to combat this, such as regulating ads that appear on social media, and that these betting company ads are restricted on TV from certain times. But there is, I believe, still more work to be done in relation to this matter. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, there are some fantastic support services out there for people who feel their gambling is becoming or getting out of control. And I would urge people to take advantage of all of these services for the sake of their own health and well-being. This debate is twofold. It's to reduce the impact of advertising in sport, but it's also, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Christopher, to help those people who have those problems to try and beat their addiction. And if we can do that through this debate today, even a step in the right direction, then the honourable gentleman deserves credit and to be commended for this, and others who have made contributions will also endorse that. Thank you.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Christopher, and it's a pleasure to contribute to this debate with you in the chair. I think it's the first time in 14 years I've been called after the Honourable Member for Strangford. But I'm delighted to have been done so, because he made a fine speech, and I'd also congratulate the Honourable Member for Inverclyde for securing the debate and for the way that he introduced it, and indeed the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green for struggling through against illness to make the case, which I know he feels passionately about. I mean, it's certainly timely that we debate this issue now in the context of the gambling reform that is following from the White Paper. And it's important because we need to look at the context in which we saw the White Paper and in which we're having this debate, which is the increasing level of gambling addiction. Now, I'm a Sheffield United season ticket holder. It's not easy.
No.
I have to say to the Honourable Member for Inverclyde, there are not many moments of joy at Bramall Lane at the moment. And I've watched them for 61 years now. But something that I've seen over the last couple of decades is the increasing dominance at the game of gambling advertising throughout the game. And not simply when we're having one of our fleeting moments in the Premiership. And that, I'm conscious, is only the tip of an iceberg in terms of the online promotion of gambling. And over that same period, I've seen the increase in gambling harm. Jack Ritchie, my constituent, who many people here know of, was also a passionate Sheffield United fan, but he took his own life due to gambling addiction, one of an estimated 400 each year, according to Public Health England. A survey by YouGov found up to 1.44 million adults in the UK harmed directly by gambling. And the NHS are picking up the pieces, setting up specialist gambling addiction clinics across the country. Last year, the NHS announced 7 new clinics, one's opening in Sheffield this month. And so what we're dealing with is something that is recognised by the government, by the NHS, as a health issue. And what do we do with other health problems? We treat them, but we also have prevention strategies. And the government's white paper provides a strong prevention strategy, and like the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green, I commend them for it. There's much in there that takes us significantly forward on the issue. But it sidesteps one important point, which is the issue of advertising and the way in which betting ads flood our sports and football in particular. Now, others have pointed out that it's estimated that there are 3,500 betting logos visible during a single televised Premier League match. And that's extraordinary. A gambling logo every 16 seconds during an average game. And according to calculations from Gambling with Lives, which my honourable friend, the member for Luton South, mentioned, out of 2,370 Premier League and EFL games this season, only 19 will not feature gambling ads. And I join others in commending Luton, and hope that they might, along with Sheffield United, escape relegation. But I commend them for that. Now, I've mentioned earlier harm for adults, but the Honourable Member for Strangford and others were right to focus also on the harm to young people, and that should worry us even more. According to the Gambling Commission, there are 80,000 UK children addicted to or at risk of gambling addiction. 80,000. They said that 40% of 11 to 17-year-olds had engaged in some form of gambling over the last 12 months. Now, that's a higher proportion than those who participated in other risk-taking activities. 20% on vaping, 9% on cigarettes, 8% illegal drugs. Now, for all of those other things, all of those other high-risk activities, we take action, and we certainly don't advertise those products. Now, a 2023 study by Sheffield University, along with Glasgow University, found that the more people are exposed to betting advertising, the more likely they are to gamble. It shouldn't be a surprise. It's what the gambling industry spend all that money for. And the greater the risk through that gambling of developing addiction. And we know that children and young people are most likely to be affected. According to a study from Bristol University, gambling ads are almost 4 times, I think it's 3.9 times, almost 4 times more appealing to children and young people than they are to adults. They say that 11 out of 12 gambling content marketing ads triggered positive responses in children and young people, compared with only 7 for adults. And the Gambling Commission report that most gambling exposure for children is when watching TV, and primarily sport, or being at a sports event. And this isn't just an issue for campaigners. Fans themselves want to see more done. A study by Survation found that 1/3 of football fans are less likely to buy a shirt with gambling sponsors, and 58% think there are too many clubs sponsored by gambling companies. Everton and Aston Villa fans have already shown that shirts without betting sponsors are more popular. And at the end of, after the end of the 2019-20 season, Everton and Villa ditched their gambling sponsors, it led to a 60% and 50% respectively rise in shirt sales. Now, others have touched on this issue of, the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green in particular, this issue of self-regulation, and some cite action by the Premier League, but it isn't working. And football has had every chance to address gambling advertising. Now, the Premier League clubs voted to ban sponsorship deals with betting companies from 2026-27, but the ban doesn't include bans on shirt sleeves, pitchside hoardings, or other sites around the stadium. And that's significant when you consider that only 7% of the 3,500 logos are visible on the front of the shirt. It's been shown that, as my honourable friend, the member for Luton South, pointed out, that the industry's voluntary whistle-to-whistle ban is completely ineffective. Research produced by the University of Bristol's Hub for Gambling Harms showed that football matches remain saturated by gambling messaging, and over two-thirds of fans feel it's not prevented children from seeing gambling ads in football. So action must come from the government, and indeed the government in waiting. The government must publicly state, or the government did publicly state, I think recently, that online slots are one of the most addictive products. And that's right, but they still allow them to be promoted through football. The White Paper proposed gambling ad-free family areas in football grounds, but 1 year on, nothing's been done. From next season, more matches are set to be screened every week. So it's clear that without government intervention, more people, and particularly more children and young people, are going to be at risk of gambling harm. I think, Sir Christopher, that the industry is running out of arguments to defend gambling advertising in sport. So if we can anticipate, and we're already seeing, and I'm surprised that there aren't some members here making that point. They are possibly at Cheltenham. But I think the industry will push sports bodies and sports fans to start making the case more that their sport depends on the revenue that they get from advertising. But it's an argument from scoundrels. We've heard it all before. Big Tobacco said the same in terms of the importance of cigarette advertising in protecting individual sports. But we know that what they were trying to do was to limit damage to their reputation by association with sport. And as we took action on cigarette advertising, so we should take action on gambling advertising. But they'll say, well, it's not the Premiership, it's lower levels, it's grassroots sport. The money's needed to sustain football. Well, let's be clear. There's plenty of money in football. It's not distributed very well. Mm-hmm. We need more effective governments. We need more of the money at the top to be shared right down the tiers of football. But the football does not depend, other sports do not depend on the money from advertising. So I'd urge the government to heed the wealth of evidence that supports the need for regulatory action, to again deploy the precautionary approach as with fixed odd betting terminals, because without action, the department risks undermining the good progress that can be made from the white paper. As the member for Inverclyde pointed out, sport is so important. It's hugely important to children and young people. It's a force for so much good. So we can't let it be used anymore by the gambling industry for so much harm. Let's end advertising and sponsorship in sport without delay.
Evan Newlands.
Thank you very much, Sir Christopher. It's been an excellent debate, and can I start by thanking and congratulating my honourable friend, Member for Inverclyde, for securing the debate and starting us off in his own style. It's always fun summing up a speech by my honourable friend. He questioned whether some of the Conservative members might be at Cheltenham. Obviously, present company clearly excluded. He spoke about puppy dogs and toilet roll, and then got to free bets. But he was absolutely right. He also mentioned I wouldn't say rank hypocrisy, but certainly hypocrisy from MPs who seek to advertise. And indeed, he mentioned he'll be seeking to encourage folk to vote Cowan and vote SNP. Hopefully that will be made easier by the fact that he's stealing a significant chunk of my constituency at the next election. So there's hopefully some SNP voters waiting there for him. He made a good point, though, in terms of about spectators and viewers' consent. These images, these adverts are everywhere, and not everyone wants to see them, but they're in your face regardless. He then spoke about all the moments in sporting history which we weren't subject to such adverts. Torval and Dean, I can and Yvette, the battles, and of course Andy Murray, I can understand, but Ian Botham, I found was a stretch too far, because that's at least two Tories that a younger Mr Cowan idolised, so I'm not quite sure that will go down well. But I am being a bit flippant about what is a very serious issue that lies beneath today's debate, and that's problem gambling and how we end that. And I very well remember I think it was the first year that I'd been elected, I had a chap who'd come on to my constituency surgery in Linwood, who he was there for the whole surgery. He was there for essentially 45 minutes talking to me about his story and his gambling past, and how he'd been at death's door, he'd ruined his life, ruined family, etc., been offered no real assistance, certainly nothing from the gambling industry with any assistance to try and stop, and was looking to try and help others from going down the same path. Fixed odd betting terms was certainly part of that, and we've legislated on that, but that progressed into all sorts of different forms of gambling, but he managed to turn his life around, but that's not the norm, Sir Christopher. We then had the former Conservative leader. The quiet man once said he was turning up the volume. Well, today sadly, it was you turning on that, and due to his voice was turning down the volume. And I was going to say sympathy, but he's a Spurs season ticket holder, so therefore things are looking up. I'll come on to Ronnie for Sheffield in a minute. But he made a very good point about the subliminal messaging through advertising that says if you gamble just a bit more, then you'll win. And I have to say, probably all of us at some point or another have been suckered, whether it's gambling or whether it's something else, have been suckered into a purchase or whatever because of subliminal advertising. And he mentioned, and I don't know if it was conflicting figures or not, or if I've just misheard, but he mentioned that in Premier League matches a reference to gambling every 21 seconds. I may have misheard that, but I think Sheffield Central said 16 seconds. So either way, it's a significant number. I just wanted for Hansard, so I recognised there was two figures there. Ronnie for Luton South mentioned the Grand National. Mentioned he might be putting a bet on the Grand National and a partner, maybe an ACA on occasion. And that actually makes me think from back to my younger days and how much gambling actually played a part in my pre-rugby rituals. I used to play rugby, like John Wember for Inverclyde. And on a Saturday morning, we used to meet, my friend and I used to meet and put lines on, as we said, what would be an ACA now, and then go and play pool, in which we invariably gambled or bet against each other. And then went downstairs to play the puggies, which is the West of Scotland term for fruit machines. I hadn't given it any thought until she said that. I very, very rarely do any gambling these days, but it does make you think that was in my younger days, so we just thought nothing of gambling as a matter of course. And now, you're right, she's pointing to her phone for Hansard, and she's absolutely right. It's so much easier to access anything like that these days as well. She said 2/3 of fans saying the voluntary eggs haven't prevented children from being able to access or see TV advertising, and I think we all see that. And she said Luton, obviously one of the very few teams in sport to ban gambling from not just their shirt but from their stadium, and that's obviously to be commended. The Honourable Member for Strangford, who yesterday morning I said in whose honour this hall should be renamed, because he is always here, he's always present and always puts in a shift. He praised Luton Town and said that other teams should perhaps reflect on that, including his own. But he did neglect to mention which team that was when he gave his speech. But we might hazard a guess as to what team that might be. But he did, one of his best points made it sound as if he didn't make any good points. He made some excellent points, but one of his best points was about the fact that we teach our young about excessive, and young adults about excessive drinking, smoking, excessive speed in cars, etc., etc. But we don't seem to talk about gambling as much, and that's very much something we should do. The Honourable Member for Sheffield Central noted that this was the first time he'd been called after the Honourable Member for Strangford in the time he'd been here, and if it had been anybody else, that might have sounded like a moan or a challenge to the chair. But obviously, having worked with the Honourable Member a few years ago, it certainly wasn't that. He mentioned he was a Sheffield United season ticket holder, who don't have the troubles to seek in a footballing sense this season, I have to say. But as a St Johnstone fan, I share his frustrations, given that St Johnstone are near the lower end of the table for the moment. He also mentioned the Sheffield University and Glasgow University study. That it seems obvious that found that the more people are exposed to advertising, the more likely they are to gamble, and obviously the more likely they are to gamble, the more people are going to fall into problem gambling. He mentioned, just to conclude my summing up, but he mentioned in terms of big tobacco, they fought gambling, advertising bans, etc., etc. But the work we've done with smoking has paid dividends, and obviously if we put in the work in gambling, I think we can see dividends there as well. it's fairly clear that gambling regulations must protect the vulnerable from harms, regardless of where they are exposed to gambling adverts. And the time, I think, has beyond passed for action to tackle the shocking rise in gambling advertising. And I think the government has done and has been praised in the work that it has done in some of these areas hitherto. But I think its failure to address this problem is something that we need to look at pretty sharpish, because ultimately the advertising revenue has grown massively since the Gambling Act in 2005. And the NEO estimated a 56% increase in advertising spend by gambling operators between 2014 and 17, driven primarily by online and social media advertising. And if that was 2017, then goodness only knows where that figure is now. The government's white paper on gambling is obviously to be welcomed. The white paper has said has proposed tougher restrictions on bonuses and direct marketing, making advertising smarter and safer, a new approach to safer gambling messaging, and socially responsible sport sponsorship, which is one of our main issues we're here to talk about today. And obviously we've mentioned the Premier League announced that the front of shirt advertising for gambling is to end by the end of the next season, or 25-26 season. And the committee, of course, the DCS committee said the withdrawals of sponsorships on the front of Premier League kit is welcome, but won't actually significantly reduce the volume of adverts visible during top-flight matches, as we've discussed today. So it's pretty clear there's a need for the government to regulate this advertising, and we need a comprehensive conversation of how, if at all, gambling adverts should be allowed. And because ultimately this is a policy debate about the reduction of harms, and what's the point in this being here if we're not into trying to reduce the harms of for all of our constituents? So we certainly call on the government to actively consider legislating to restrict the amount of advertising that gambling firms can procure in public broadcasting and sporting events. The only slight caveat is something the Honourable Member for Sheffield Central, no caveat to that previous point, but caveat in general terms. The Member for Sheffield Central said that there's absolutely no need for this form of advertising as well. And in principle, I 100% agree. And he mentioned that there's enough money in football, and football doesn't need that money. The only slight caveat, having met with Scottish clubs and indeed umbrella bodies, is that the Scottish game isn't awash with the same level of money as it is in England, and advertising revenue is much harder to come by in Scotland, being such a smaller market in comparison to England. So it could cause some problems, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be addressing it and shouldn't be tackling it. I just think we should put on record that it's not perhaps as straightforward in Scotland or in Wales, etc., than perhaps it is south of the border. Because gambling in 2018-19, gambling companies yielded over £11 billion, which raised about £3 billion for the government in gambling duties. And it has been transformed, the industry transformed by social and technological changes, and licensed gambling has grown by 57% in real terms in the last decade. But British gamblers lose £14 billion a year, according to the Gambling Commission, and it's home to the world's largest regulated online betting market, with £14.2 billion in profits each year. Of course, other countries like Germany introduced limits on how much customers can deposit. So, in our view, the 2005 Act must be modernised and made effective for the digital age, and provide adequate protections against gambling-related harms for problem gamblers and children. And to conclude, Sir Chope, for problem gamblers, the impact can be harmful and massively addictive. We've heard already that over one person each day attempts to or commits suicide in the UK because of gambling-related harms, and as we heard, sadly, that includes Jack Ritchie of the Honourable for Sheffield Central's constituency. And 2 million families are blighted by problem gambling, and more than 55,000 children between 11 and 16 are addicted to gambling. Pretty shocking statistics. And according to the YouGov survey, I'll finish on this, of 18,000 people commissioned by Gamble Aware, gambling addiction rates may be 9 times higher than the betting industry claims, finding 1.4 million people are being harmed by their own gambling, with a further 1.5 million at risk. So to me, I think it seems pretty clear. Although the attendance today hasn't been as good as it perhaps should have been, I think we've had 5 backbench speeches and now 1 frontbench speech, all speaking with one voice on this issue. And I think it's time for the government to act on this, or indeed a new incoming government if that were to happen at the end of this year. But thank you very much.
Serve under your chairmanship, Sir Christopher, and I thank the Honourable Member for Inverclyde for securing this important debate. I'd like to begin by referring to my register of interests. The relationship between gambling and most sports is complex and in many ways symbiotic. However, given the growing knowledge of the impact of gambling harms on people's lives, many have raised concerns about this connection. They worry that football and other sports might be playing a role in exposing vulnerable fans, sports people, and in particular children and young people to the gambling market. Indeed, having met with some of those receiving treatment for gambling addiction, as well as families bereaved by gambling-related loss, I have seen the devastating effect gambling harm can have on people's lives. In 2020, it was estimated that 7% of the population, including both adults and children, were negatively affected by someone else's gambling. This is even more concerning in the context of the modernised world, where most people now have the ability to gamble anywhere, at any time on their phones. I am therefore pleased that the government are finally underway with the implementation stage of the long-awaited Gambling White Paper, which looks to make our gambling regulation fit for the modern digital era. Indeed, it is supported cross-party, as the members for Chingford and Wood Green and Sheffield Central outlined. However, the paper was relatively light touch on the issues related to gambling advertising and sport, identifying sports governing bodies as best placed to drive up standards regarding their gambling sponsorship deals. This is not to say that no action has been taken in this area. Outside of the White Paper, regulators, industry and sport have made progress to increase protections. Last week, I met with the Advertising Standards Authority, who told me about their work regulating gambling advertising, particularly with a view to protecting children and young people, which includes the strong appeal test. The gambling industry has signed up to a voluntary code of socially responsible advertising that bans gambling adverts before 9 o'clock. The most recent version of this covers most live sport from 5 minutes before it starts to 5 minutes after it has ended. This is known as the whistle-to-whistle ban, which has reduced the number of TV betting commercials viewed by children during live sporting events before the watershed by 97%. The Premier League have also announced that front-of-shirt gambling sponsors will be withdrawn from the start of the season in 2026. However, these measures have received their fair share of criticism too. Viewers are still exposed to a high number of gambling adverts and logos during sporting events, as highlighted by the member for Luton South. This happens through a number of different visuals, from hoardings and perimeter boards to players' kits. Indeed, the Premier League's commitment does not cover sponsorship on the sleeves or backs of shirt, and regardless, is not yet in force. As already discussed, the revenue from gambling sponsorship is crucial to some sports. However, the prevalence of such adverts does pose a particular issue for children, or those vulnerable to problem gambling, as they are difficult to avoid, as the member for Strangford spoke about. Unlike the online space or with direct marketing, it is not possible to opt out of these adverts. This makes it hard for those with personal experience of problem gambling to follow the sports they previously enjoyed, and it's hard for parents to know the best way to protect their children from harm. It is in this context we need the Sports Sponsorship Code of Conduct to be published. Required by the government's white paper and led by sports governing bodies, this code would recognise that the relationship between gambling and sports needs to be conducted responsibly in order to prevent gambling harm in both sports people and sports fans. To do this, I understand the code will be based on principles of reinvestment, sporting integrity, protecting children and vulnerable people, and socially responsible promotion. In practice, this could include things like ensuring replica kits are available without gambling logos, committing to reinvest sponsorship funds into grassroots activities, using sponsorship to promote safer gambling messages, or protecting family areas in stadiums from being able to see gambling advertising. I understand that as part of the development process, there will initially be one main code to cover all sporting bodies, and after this, each governing body will be able to develop a short sport-specific code, whether that be for racing, cricket, football or others. However, there has been no sign of the main code, let alone sport-specific commitments. So I'd like to ask the Minister today, therefore, whether we will call on the governing bodies to publish the codes without further delay, perhaps in time for the first anniversary of the White Paper. This is something the CMS committee recommended in their report published last year, to which the government have yet to respond. This is a concern, as without the code, the white paper seems to hardly address the relationship between gambling and sport. It is only through a combination of measures, from powers in the Gambling Commission to crack down on the black market, to the measures that will restrict bonus and free bet offers, that we will bring our regulation into the modern age and better protect people from harm. There is no question that gambling advertising on the whole has increased in the last 2 decades. The impact of gambling harms could be better understood and researched, and this is one of the reasons why I would like to see the statutory levy for gambling underway soon, so that levy funds can be used to conduct the research needed to aid effective prevention and treatment methods going forward. It would therefore be helpful if the Minister would provide an update on the levy consultation and when they might expect to publish a response to this. So to conclude, I hear the concerns outlined today regarding the impact of gambling advertising in sport on children and young people, as well as those vulnerable to harm. Given the reliance that many sports have on gambling sponsorship for revenue, it is crucial that the governing bodies reflect on this relationship and issue their code of conduct as soon as possible. I hope the Minister will reaffirm his commitment to ensuring this code is published, as well as the implementation of the white paper more broadly.
Before calling the Minister, can I say to the Honourable Lady, she began her speech by referring to the Register of Interests, but she didn't expand upon that at all. And people who are following this debate and other debates like it, I think, need to be informed of the nature of those interests. And I wonder whether the Honourable Lady would like to spell out the nature of those interests.
Yeah, I've previously taken hospitality from the gambling industry. I'd have to check the dates to say specifically which one that was, but I'm happy to inform the House at a later date if needed.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. Minister.
Thank you, Sir Christopher, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for Inverclyde for tabling this important debate this afternoon. His SNP colleague was complaining that he's pinched part of his constituency. Well, as someone who's had his entire constituency abolished, I can certainly have some sympathy. But in all seriousness, can I say that it is important that we have this debate, raising this issue at a crucial moment in the government's commitment at tackling gambling harms. And I'd also like to thank all of the contributions that we've heard this afternoon for their thoughtful comments. It really has been valuable for me to hear the range of perspectives this afternoon. Indeed, I have welcomed very much the constructive engagement we have had in my time in this role as the Gambling Minister, because I am keen to hear from all sides. I recognise that many people do gamble safely, but equally I'm always mindful of those families that I think we have all met who have gone through probably some of the most unimaginable pain we could think of. I want to start by saying that the government recognises the concerns many have raised on the presence and impact of gambling advertising in general and around sport in particular. The issue of gambling advertising remains clearly an area of vibrant debate, and rightly so, and it has been raised by colleagues with me directly and in the media since I took on the gambling brief just over a year ago. And I think the debate on advertising really encapsulates the balance that we are aiming to strike on gambling in terms of regulation, looking at regulating an innovative and responsible gambling industry on the one hand, and the duty of the government to protect children and the wider public from gambling-related harm on the other. Developments in technology, has already been mentioned by colleagues, have undoubtedly led to rapid changes in the gambling landscape. The smartphone era comes with risks and opportunities, so we need to strike the balance between freedom and protection. And that is why we committed to that root and branch review of gambling legislation. We took an exhaustive look at the best available evidence, including on advertising, as part of our Gambling Act review. And the white paper we published in April last year captures our vision for the sector, our robust package of reforms aimed to mitigate the risks of gambling-related harm and seize the opportunities to prevent it at the earliest possible opportunity. Now, it has been said that we sidestepped the issue of advertising. I think that's slightly unfair. The evidence-led action on advertising forms an important part of that vision. The liberalisation of gambling advertising was one of the major changes introduced in the 2005 Gambling Act, and we have undoubtedly witnessed the continual growth of gambling marketing since 2005. However, it is important to reflect that we have not seen an increase in gambling participation rates or in population gambling harm rates over the same time frame. Those have remained broadly the same. Nonetheless, I recognise that a parallel change has been the increasing visible integration of gambling advertising with sport. And this is especially relevant to me as the Minister responsible for sport alongside civil society. Through our Gambling Act review, we considered evidence that gambling brands provided 12% of sports sponsorship revenue. Gambling brands are also most strongly present in top-tier football, as has been mentioned, where 8 out of 20 Premier League teams this season have front-of-shirt gambling sponsors. In fact, gambling sponsors contribute around 45 million per year across the English Football League's 3 leagues, and a significantly higher proportion of revenue in the Scottish Football Leagues, as the Honourable Gentleman mentioned. Gambling sponsorship represents a significant source of income for sport, other than football, with around 80 million in sponsorship revenue. Now, we know that sports sponsorship by gambling firms can have a level of impact on gambling behaviour. The Gambling Commission's consumer journey research shows that seeing sponsorship was a passive influence on gambling behaviour. However, it is far less influential than winning a significant amount of money or hearing about someone else's big win. The evidence to date, therefore, shows that while gambling advertising around sport is widely noticed, it has a background effect when it comes to having an impact on gambling behaviour. Further, industry's whistle-to-whistle bans, the Honourable Lady just mentioned. Yes?
Thank the Minister for giving way, and I accept that he's making an argument with integrity, but if advertising has such a marginal impact, why does he think the gambling industry spends so much on it?
Minister.
I'm going to come on to, because I think we've had this discussion before, and I think one of the things that, the reasons why I feel that our white paper has landed as well as it could do in a challenging policy area as this, is it's heavily been developed through the very best evidence. And I want to come on to that point because I think there probably is further work to be done in this field. Further to the industry's whistle-to-whistle ban has cut the number of pre-9 p.m. betting adverts to around a quarter of their previous level, as the Honourable Lady mentioned, and further cut the average number of sports betting adverts seen by children to just 0.3 per week. Nonetheless, we also know that gambling sponsorship is one of the main ways children are exposed to gambling, and that gambling marketing can have a disproportionate impact on those who are already experiencing gambling harm. And that is why, since October 22, the advertising rules have been strengthened. Content which has strong appeal to children, such as that involving top-flight footballers, and which creates a sense of urgency to gamble, or are banned from being in gambling adverts. This further protects children and vulnerable adults. Now, following on from the Gambling White Paper, we are in the process of implementing a comprehensive suite of protections ranging from action on advertising, on products, and on the way that gambling is provided to prevent gambling-related harms. And in line with existing gambling advertising rules, as has already been mentioned, the Premier League's decision to ban front-of-shirt sponsorship by gambling firms will commence by the end of the 25-26 season. I can also confirm today that a cross-sport code of conduct for gambling sponsorship has been agreed by a number of the country's major sporting governing bodies, from the Premier League and the EFL to British Horse Racing Authority, the English Cricket Board and others. Indeed, the Rugby Football League sought to build in the code's provisions as part of their renewed agreement with Betfred. This landmark code fulfills a key commitment we made in the White Paper ahead of schedule and will bind all domestic sports governing bodies to 4 core principles. Firstly, all sports will ensure socially responsible promotion. Education and awareness will form a key part of the sports marketing activities, including in stadia, as honourable members have mentioned today. Yes?
Again.
Briefly. We've just acknowledged the need to build in education support. So we're acknowledging the fact that potential damage has been done by this product in the first place. The gambling industry can't have it both ways. They're causing the damage, and at the same time, they're painting themselves as the good guys because they're going to help support people out of addiction. They can't own both organisations. Right now, they own both organisations.
Minister.
Well, as I say, I'm going to come on to further research that I do feel we need to do, but I want to also emphasise we are trying to do a considerable amount of work here as part of the wider white paper reforms. In essence, we are trying to deal with 15 years of digital progress, which is really quite significant. And I should, at this point, want to pay tribute to all of the team over at DCMS who are working extremely hard to meet those obligations, to meet that commitment that we made to get the majority of these done by the summer of this year, recognising that actually implementing those will have the greatest impact on tackling gambling harm. The second core principle is the protection of children and vulnerable people. Sponsorship has to be designed to limit reach to children and those at risk of gambling harm, and this will see adult replica kits, as was mentioned, available without the front of shirt gambling logo. And the third principle is one of reinvestment into sport. The commercial income raised from gambling sponsorship will provide grassroots services that genuinely serve fans and communities. And finally, the code will ensure that gambling sponsorship maintains sport integrity. Sponsorship arrangements will build in appropriate requirements that they do not compromise the integrity of sporting competitions nor harm the welfare of participants. Together, these principles will establish a robust minimum standard for gambling sports sponsorship across all sports. Of course, the commercial arrangements and fan bases differ across the industry, and that is why individual sports governing bodies will also introduce bespoke arrangements to fulfil these principles in a way that is which is tailored to maximise their impact, and some sports, including football, intend to have their arrangements in place as early as this year, ahead of the next season. Ultimately, this will guarantee that where gambling sponsorship does appear, it is done in a responsible way, and that fans, especially children, are better protected. Now, to effectively prevent gambling-related harm, there is no single intervention that provides the answer, and that is why we've taken an evidence-led approach to implement a package of reforms targeted at different levels, including on advertising. We absolutely recognise that advertising can have a disproportionate impact on those experiencing gambling harms. Technological advances and developments and the increasing dominance of online gambling have necessitated a doubling of efforts from us as a government, and we and the Gambling Commission are now taking targeted action to ban harmful practices and ensure that advertising remains socially responsible wherever it appears. The Commission has recently consulted on strengthened protections to ensure that free bets and bonuses are constructed in a way which does not encourage excessive or harmful gambling, and this is in conjunction with new rules to give consumers more control over the direct gambling marketing they wish to receive. Together, these measures will empower customers and prohibit harmful marketing practices to further prevent the risk of gambling harms. The Commission will set out its response to the consultation in due course. Our holistic approach also includes action on the products themselves. We recently announced the introduction of the stake limits, as the Honourable Gentleman mentioned, for online slot games, where we have seen evidence of elevated levels of harmful gambling. But we are also pursuing broader protections, such as the financial risk checks, and further strengthening restrictions on game design themselves. And I am clear that effective and innovative collaboration to get the right mix of interventions for the population as a whole and those with specific needs is really required to tackle this issue. Now, evidence has been a key theme in this afternoon's debate, and I want to end by recognising that further work is needed in this area. A concerted effort to build the evidence base to ensure policy and regulation is able to deal with the emerging issues is paramount, and the Gambling Commission's important work on the Gambling Survey for Great Britain aligns with this priority. The survey will, in time, provide us with a better picture of gambling behaviour and the nature of gambling-related harm. However, developing quality evidence is also a key priority for the government's statutory levy. Increased and ring-fenced funding will be directed towards high-quality, independent research around gambling and gambling-related harms, including on advertising. And as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, made clear at the launch of the White Paper, if new evidence suggests that we need to go further, then we will look at this again. Sir Christopher, thank you again to the honourable member for Inverclyde for tabling this important debate. And as I say, to all the members who've made valuable contributions, I am committed to tackling gambling-related harms, and I am confident that the action we are taking will have a real impact in reducing those harms across the country. But I do believe that that new levy we have will provide us with even more evidence we need, and as I've committed a moment ago, if further action is needed, then we will look at it again.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you very much. Thank you everybody who's taken the time and effort to be here today and spoken so well in this particular debate. And thanks to the Minister for being here as he is. And I understand the hard work that his staff are putting into to get to resolve many of the gambling issues that we have. We all have constituents that are damaged and families torn apart. And I'm sure in some cases individuals have completed suicide because of their gambling addiction. It is not always obvious because gambling addiction tends to be a hidden addiction. I did the big step, the guys from Gambling with Lives. I've done it a number of times now. And the last time we were doing it, one of the guys came up to me during the walk and he said, you know, if I was an alcoholic and my local landlord came down to my door at night and said, have a case of beer, have a bottle of whiskey, have a bottle of gin, people would think that behaviour is reprehensible. But I'm a recovering gambling addict. And people still send me adverts saying, do you want a free bet? Do you want 5 bets on this? And it's exactly the same thing. And I'd like to thank all the organisations and individuals that have helped me gain a better understanding of this situation, no more so than Martin Patterson. Martin sent me a message today as a recovering gambling addict. Martin said, can I add, as a person in recovery, like millions of others over the years, the ads are triggering so many back into the hole of gambling addiction. Martin, you stay strong, we'll keep up the fight.
The question is that this House has considered gambling advertising in sport. Many opinions say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 4 p.m.